141 of the LSR podcast. My name is Matt Brown, joined each and every week by the brightest minds in all of the gaming industry. With me, I have Justin Gowker. I have Adam Candy. You can follow them on the Twitter machine for free, and you should, at Adam Candy, 2 E's, no Y, at Dustin Gowker. If you hate yourself, you can follow me at Matt Brown M2. We are going to talk about, listen, there was a pretty, I guess you could say, consequential ruling in New York on the state of daily fantasy sports. We have what's going on in California. There is an offshore that is being monitored pretty heavily right now. And of course, we will go with the state roundup at the end as usual. But let's kick things off here. Brad does a piece that starts off just talking specifically about just the stock prices in general of basically the gaming industry as a whole. But Dustin, it kind of goes off into a couple of different companies and where they might be headed moving forward. Just at least, you know, some speculation going on there as far as, you know, how does all of this affect them in the long term?
Yeah, so the big one here is DraftKings and what's going on there. You know, outsized interest and always about DraftKings, which was at one point a darling of investors when it went public. The stock has fallen on hard times. I don't know what it's trading at today, but it has been under 20 for a little while here. And what people are looking at is whether there's a path. What's the path to profitability? And right now, DraftKings is, as we all know and have said on this podcast ad nauseum, is spending a lot of money. The way to get a profitability: one, you either spend less money, or two, you go get more money to try to continue growing market share. So there's a lot of different ways that, you know, what is DraftKings going to do is a big question right now. Are they going to go get more money? But people, you know, are people going to go buy a bunch of DraftKings stock when it's been depressed? Is DraftKings at this point an M&A target? I think that's a legitimate thing as well. Whether somebody should look to acquire DraftKings and leverage the brand moving forward. So. You know, DraftKings is an interesting one, and I highly recommend going over to read Brad's piece and details all of this, and really good read on where things stand with DraftKings, and it is. But yeah, it goes with this trend I think we've been talking about for several weeks at least about, you know, there's a little bit of a reckoning in the sports betting industry, and DraftKings is not immune to that by any stretch.
Adam, he also mentions PointBet in the article.
Yeah, PointsBet is another company that I think has received a lot of chatter in the industry when it comes to what is the future for not just PointsBet, for all of these second to third tier operators in the U.S. Is there a second life, right? Do we see the market reset in some way after a few years if a major player like a DraftKings does have to I can't even get the words sell out of my mouth because it's just not the way they've operated for so long. But then again, you know, we look at the article that Brad put together where you have multiple analysts talking about the fact that, you know, the stock is down 70% over the course of a year. You're trading up at a high in the 70s. You've been trading down the teens for the last couple of weeks at the least. And, you know, Jason Robbins made quite a bit of noise on Twitter, as he's wont to do from time to time, saying that if you are someone who sold DraftKings at the bottom, that he and his team are going to do everything within their power to make you regret that decision for the rest of your life. Okay. I mean, sometimes not tweeting through it is also okay. But when we look at the situation with PointsBet, as you led me into here, you know, that's another company that might have 1 to 2 years of cash on hand at this point. They have some notable partnerships. They've spent a lot of money. They were kind of counting on Illinois being a place where they could get in and use the advantage of having in-person registration and having a really local casino. That blew up on them a little bit with COVID situations. So what does a PointsBet kind of company do as they see that their market share really isn't ticking, you know, much past that 5% mark anywhere? So that's a question I think for not only the industry to figure out is what is the lifespan, the life cycle of these companies that are, you know, not really making much of a dent right now. And also a question for investors as to will they continue to bail out a company like DraftKings if they go back and want to sell more? The analysts in Brad's piece talk about the fact that that might not be a very attractive option within the market given the state of the company right now. And you know, the question that I'll bat back to you guys is to say what was interesting to me in the piece was those who said, well, I mean, if DraftKings just stopped spending today, they could be profitable next quarter. Right, but then they would lose market share almost instantly based on what we've seen so far in how this operates. I mean, Caesars is going to try some version of this, and we'll see how it goes for them. But it kind of feels like, yeah, you can say that, but you can't really do that.
Dustin, I guess the question here remains, right, is what would it take for everybody to get, back excited about all this stuff again? I mean, at the end of the day, that was, you could still sports bet during the pandemic, and people might not have been going to casinos, and they might not have been going to restaurants, and they might not have been going to whatever, but you could still sports bet, and everybody got super excited about that. I mean, would it be, we all here assume something's going to get done in Texas next session. We think there's still things, tiptoeing around in California. Something eventually will get done in Florida. Is it one of the major states, going with online casino? Like, what do you think it is, and that might actually kind of regenerate some of the energy again?
Is that even enough at this point? I mean, we had, at some point, New York launching was already baked into DraftKings price, right? And then it launched, and it's not been doing great, and New York has also has some problems for operators, from the high tax rate to there's just headwinds there. I mean, if California were to open up and have a wide open market, which we're going to talk about that in a little bit, I'm not betting on that happening anytime soon, then that's a needle mover. Like California by itself, it would be, I don't know, without off the top of my head think about the numbers, but certainly like maybe half of all sports betting activity in the United States immediately, if that's the case. Somewhere between a small minority to a large minority to over half of betting could happen in California if we get a wide open market in California. That moves the needle. Casino, I think, moves the needle too. Again, this is these companies are all looking at the future. Sports betting, we're not lying, is a small margin business. You have to get a lot of people in the door. You're trying to get by on the edges. You're making 10% if you're doing really well, and sometimes less than that if you're depending on what's going on. But casino moves the needle for sure. Especially New York's not going to get there this year. It looks like it has a shot next year. Those are the things I think those markets open up, but there's still long-term sustainability. Like Caesars is a great example. We had a really good short-term here. We spent a lot of money. We acquired a lot of customers. We you can even see in the New York numbers that they didn't retain all of those customers, or they're losing market share already by pulling back on their promos and their ad spend. So I don't know what moves the needle anymore. It's maybe it was just it was way too blown up, and things have gotten back in line, and we get to a normalization. I think DraftKings is probably, as we sit here, probably undervalued, but I'm not going to sit here and make stock recommendations or prices. But it's clearly a better company than the stock market indicates, and certainly probably not as good of a company as the high price share when at the height of the pandemic was letting on.
Yeah, Adam, I mean, look, the thing that we've talked about a lot of times on here, right, is that the end goal, if for all of these companies, if you gave them all, truth serum, would be the online casino aspect of everything, right? I mean, we know that is a super high margin business, and that is where it's easiest to make money in a short amount of time. So, I mean, kind of like Dustin said, I don't, there's no stock advice going on or anything like that. But I mean, that is definitely the long-term goal for all this. I guess the question is just, can they make it to that long-term goal?
I'm not sure that they can. I'm not sure anyone can, because the appetite for online casino among legislators and regulators is never going to be what the appetite for sports betting is. It just doesn't move the needle among the populace the same way that sports betting does, right? And of course, with sports betting, you have these external forces, especially with the leagues, especially pushing for it in a way that no one's ever going to be pushing for iGaming. And iGaming on its own, I think, is going to continue to evoke the old boogeyman of click a mouse, lose your house in a way that sports betting really doesn't. So yeah, I'm not sure that you ever get quite to that point. So the question then becomes, all right, so if these new markets open, why do we believe these new markets look any different than the launches we've seen in other markets? And to me, that comes back to two things. One is product, and the other is fragmentation. And when we talk about product, we've already seen FanDuel start to talk about it, right? We saw Peter Jackson, the CEO of Flutter, say, basically, yeah, they went off with you for a little while with that cash that you flashed, but baby, they're always going to come home to us in the end because they like who we've got, right? They like our product. And the fragmentation part is what we talked about last week with New York and the fact that they're going to open up to 16 licenses if this bill passes that's going through right now. And the question is, who's going to take them? And who's going to pay the money to get into the market knowing that they might not be able to move the needle past 3 or 4%? So in the end, I still think it's way more about that product than it is about fragmentation.
Dustin, you and I sat up late night. We sweat this so many different times. It came through. DFS was going to make it in New York, and everything was right in the world again. And we honestly, if we look back at that moment, I mean, with the companies that are still around, when we talk about DraftKings and FanDuel and things like that, I mean, it's that moment in time might have certainly saved them. And I think both of us believe that that's the truth. That said, there was some challenges to all of that, but after all is said and done, it does look like the verdict that we got the first time around is where we sit.
I just love all these throwbacks we're doing to daily fantasy sports. Like, we just forget that it even exists. It's still a customer acquisition point for DraftKings and FanDuel, and there's a bunch of other fantasy companies. So fantasy's still out there as a placeholder for sports betting when it doesn't come out. Anyway, what happened is this law that New York passed in 2016 to legalize daily fantasy sports and basically saved DraftKings and FanDuel's bacon. It has been under challenge in court in New York State court system for now almost 6 years. It has lost at 2 different steps along the way, saying that the law, that 2016 law regulating and legalizing daily fantasy sports, was against the Constitution. So we finally get to the highest court, the appeals court in New York, Court of Appeals, and they said that this is okay. They overturned the lower court rulings that said this was unconstitutional, saying that this is now okay. So we're going back to apparently the world where DFS is legal and regulated again in New York. I think the fallout would have been far greater had it stayed in place, because it's just kind of been in limbo as this court case has played out. But now we're back to kind of status quo. We had this possibility that DFS would be illegal in the state and sports betting was legal, which I would have laughed at. I would still be laughing if that had happened. But we're back here in the status quo of where things are. Apparently we're going to probably get some more operators offering legal DFS in New York. But yeah, it seems like kind of the end of everything here and these legal wranglings around DFS. But yeah, it's crazy to think this has been going on for 6 years and we're just now getting to a resolution.
It is, in fact, legal. More game of skill than game of chance. And Adam, look, at the end of the day, I'm a little biased here. I used to play a ton of DFS back in the day. I truly do believe that there's a reason why a lot of the same guys win all of the money all the time. Like, I truly believe that it is a lot more skill than it is luck. You do have to have some luck in the way that things play out from a sporting aspect or whatever. But I mean, even from a season-long even from a season-long fantasy perspective that you've played, I'm sure, for 20 plus years with friends and whatever. I mean, like, it tends to be like guys that are better at this tend to win more often than not, which does indicate that skill is prevalent in all of this.
I would just say that if one of the major problems in this industry was at one point needing to be able to regulate guys who had scripts that were putting in thousands of entries, they weren't putting in thousands of lottery tickets. They were putting in thousands of skill-based entries into these contests, trying to, work that system as best they could. I'm just so thrilled that in 2022, we are still talking about game of skill versus game of chance. Although, who knows, this might be the end of it.
Hopefully. We can only hope. Adam, I'm going to stick with you here, and I brought up California a little bit earlier. Maybe, again, one of the prize jewels that is still hanging out there for these sports betting companies. What are we starting to see over in California, however?
Not quite a bare-knuckle brawl yet, but get ready, because it's coming to the airwaves. If you got sick of sports betting ads during NFL season last year, you in California might just get sick of political ads fighting about bringing sports betting to California. There has been, to date, and this is not a final number, $200 million pledged to the fight of who will control sports betting in California. So here's where we stand. The tribal nations that put forward the initiative to make sports betting in California a retail-only operation, at least for the first 5 years, have launched an ad campaign in which they are basically using a lot of tried and true political axioms, talking about out-of-state companies coming in, trying to control the market, about breaking the promise that was made to these nations in terms of exclusivity over gambling. Those have begun on the airwaves. It's March. The election's in November. That one is the only initiative, by the way, the tribal one, is the only one that is qualified for the ballot. And I think that's what's notable in the fact that this ad campaign has begun. The nations are campaigning here against something that is still trying to make the ballot. So they're trying to clear the field for themselves before this can gather enough signatures, either the one that is backed by sports books or the one that is backed by card rooms, to make its way to the ballot. Now, keep in mind, it's not just about sports betting. Tribal nations also, perhaps more notably, would get ball and dice games as part of that initiative as well. So it would serve to block off the sports betting market from any sort of online operation, at least for 5 years, as the tribes say they want to evaluate what the effect is of opening up sports betting on their retail properties. But what we know is that these other two initiatives are still in the signature gathering phase. There's a deadline of June for them to qualify for the 2022 ballot. And what you can guarantee among all of these options is that you are going to be saturated throughout the state of California with advertising trying to get you to vote for one particular sports betting initiative.
Dustin, the one thing we do know about these tribal casinos is they have a ton of money, and it makes you wonder if they are very, very, very adamant about this. To what extent are they willing to go to try to make sure that their point of view is the only point of view that anybody sees or anyone cares about? I mean, look, you and I lived through it well over a decade ago where it was like, oh, online poker is coming to California. Like it's definitely happening and whatever. And, there were friends that were moving over there and all this, that, and the other. And of course that never, ever came to fruition either, with all the roadblocks that they kept running into. And, I look at something like this, and as much as we want something to get done in California, as much as we want to see another 35 million people have access to legalized sports betting and whatnot, I really and truly wonder how much that power and money is willing to go to make sure that we don't see it anytime soon.
I mean, I think, yes, they're willing to spend whatever amount it takes to stop this, because they see this as an erosion of what they think they deserve exclusivity on. Will that happen? Yes. I think Adam's made this point in other settings or on here even, like there's going to be confusion because there could be multiple ballot measures. Can they stop all of those? I don't know. If it was simple as I'm stopping one, that's very easy. Like you spend any money, stop it. But like if you have all of these different sports betting, one of them benefits the homeless. It's gonna be a little harder when the messaging is not as clear. I mean, you have to say, can you just say don't bet on any sports betting initiatives? That's not a great. That's also not a great message that they're spending. So I think they have the will. I think there's probably some problems for them trying to stop it. Can they stop it? Absolutely. And I do believe that. There is a point at which I think everybody kind of thought, oh, maybe they've got the tribes on board. And now there's enough tribes, I think, who have said, no, we're not ready for this, or we don't want it this way. And, there hasn't been enough conversation. So as much as you think, leagues and these sportsbook operators can come in and push things around, I'm not sure that's the case in California, because like you said, these tribes are very well heeled and will have done whatever is needed to do what is in their best interest. And it's clearly, I think, what they think is not allowing an expansion of sports betting right now.
Dustin, look, we've seen this from time to time. Certainly, when I was far, far, far younger in my early 20s, I saw several different offshore sports books come and go. I saw a lot of money evaporate into thin air, and where that money is probably on an island somewhere with a guy living in a house and feeling pretty good about himself. But look, we hadn't seen as many cases of that recently. We sort of started to see at least some of the bigger companies that have lasted throughout the test of time here through all of that. But we are having something kind of weird go on right now.
I don't even know. I brought it up just as we're talking about this. It was down when we started the podcast. As I Google it, And to go there, sportsbetting.ag appears to be back up, unless I'm mistaken. Or wait, no, we're looking at Sportsbook. I'm so sorry.
Yes.
Oh, look at you. Look at you, just another victim of the system. Can't tell them apart.
But yeah, so sportsbook.ag is down. It's hard to tell because they are different, but Offshore Sportsbook, obviously AG is not a legal and regulated sportsbook here in the United States. The site has been down for some amount of time, says undergoing maintenance, currently unavailable. Now this leads to all sorts of questions and speculation. This is certainly not the first time we've seen this. But we saw 5 Dimes obviously go down, come out, split the business, and is trying to be, obviously, I don't know where that's gone, but tried to be just a platform provider in regulated markets. Has not happened. There's been obviously some heat from the feds there. We've seen a Bet Online or a Bovada go down. So we know, as we sit here, nothing about what Sportsbook.ag is doing. It could just be down for maintenance, like it says. But there's this does give us a chance to highlight really the difference between regulated and unregulated. Because if a sportsbook were down in the United States and people couldn't get their money, you'd have regulators saying, what the hell is going on? We don't have that because obviously the .ag for Antigua, people, you can't just go to a regulator and they're going to say, oh, here's what's going on. That's not what happens in the unregulated space. So, interesting that it's down. We know nothing, but it does, with a vacuum of information, people are a little worried, and it is a good time to highlight the differences between regulated and offshore sports betting. That, not that everything in the regulated market is perfect, but if a site were down, your money is safe, or there'd be hell to pay. And right now we're just in a vacuum of information and don't know what's going on with the site.
Adam, we're sitting here. Look, it's a twofold thing for us, right? Where we go, hey, if you have legalized sports betting in your state, then there's no reason for you to be worried about something like this. And at the same time, we've also said, if your state doesn't give you access to legalized sports betting, we're not going to sit here and try to say, don't bet at all and whatever. So, I mean, like I understand if you're in a state that doesn't have legalized sports betting. If you do not have a legal option, then, whatever. Look, before I had a legal option, I did this. I did the same thing. So that being said, you see stuff like this, and it really does kind of drive home where there is no recourse. There is no way to do anything other than cross your fingers and pray. Why we always kind of say that if the option is available to you, this is a prime example of why that this is a good thing to have the legalized option.
It's also a good time to bring up that if you're someone who follows this space, at least follows the media space, maybe follow folks who purport to be professional sports bettors on social media, et cetera, you need to understand that their interest in this is different than your interest in this. If you're someone who bets at the kind of bankroll that most pros or sharps do, then yes, the difference between getting minus 105 and minus 110 is enormous to you when you're cycling that much money through. But the legal U.S. market, that is not the average player, right? Your money is not going to be nearly as affected by the minus 105 versus the minus 110, just to use one example of what is often highlighted as, well, you get better odds offshore. You damn well might, because you are dealing with a company that is not dealing with the costs of regulation, the cost of operating within the United States. But these are the moments where you really highlight the difference, because that person who is betting offshore with 5 and 6 and 7 figures, they can afford to take a hit in the offshore market. You likely can't with whatever money that you're going to put in there. And so the regulated market offers you at least that peace of mind, if not the most advantageous odds and prices at every turn. So there are reasons we talk about this on this podcast in particular. When we try to highlight the differences between the regulated market and the offshore illegal market, it's not just sitting here and yelling and crowing because DraftKings, FanDuel, MGM are the greatest things ever. We're talking about these are the things that are going to affect what is going to be a broad-based U.S. market. And there continues to be this tug of war among those who put forward ideas about the industry, about what the point of the regulated industry is and about what the reach of the regulated industry is. The regulated industry's reach is about $25, $50, and $100 bettors. It is not about guys who are grinding every day with 7 monitors in front of them. there's a place for that, and a lot of it's in the offshore market.
That is actually a point that is not talked about near enough. And basically, like, let's look. Yeah, I do programming where I preach about getting the best number, but I'm talking about specifically where if you're going to go bet a future on golfer X, Y, or Z or team X, Y, or Z, and you have an option to get a 50-1 as opposed to a 30-1, then you should always take the 50-1 as opposed to, but like you're saying, a typical everyday bet where someone might be dealing, like you're saying, minus 105 as opposed to the typical minus 110. If you're only a $25 bettor, which again, over 90% of people are, those pennies, it's not worth it. Like it doesn't even come close. You'll never miss the pennies. Like you'll never miss the pennies. It's like it is the difference comes in what you're talking about. Where yes, if you're betting $5,000 a game, you're betting $10,000 a game. By all means, yes, that makes a difference to your bottom line. There's no doubt about it. But the pennies difference that the average typical over 90% of bettors actually bet, it's just totally not worth it. And honestly, that is not something that's talked about enough when it comes to just the daily day. You can still get the best number on regulated sports books on things where it really does make a difference to you. Whether if you bet a $20 bet on a 50-1 or a 30-1, that's a big difference to you. That's a $200, it's a big difference, but it's not something that if you're betting just your game on a Wednesday,
And that's important when we talk about what market-making books are, right? Market-making books are the kind of books where this is what they do. That's the point of the prices in a lot of cases, is that they know that the guys who have the kind of money that can pound that number into place are going to do so, but they have such liquidity coming through those books, it doesn't matter to them in the same way. So obviously, those who bet that kind of money with offshore books are going to rail at the regulated market because they don't get the same limits. They don't get the same prices. And you know what? I'm not here to tell them they're wrong. They have a different interest in this whole thing than most of the people. As you said, the 95% of people who are going to be betting in this larger legalized market.
All this being said, I'm pretty sure I got a pitch at one point for Acorn for sports betting, where you put the money away, you put pennies away, and then you bet it. I guarantee this. And if it wasn't, I could just make that up, and it would sound like something that I would have gotten pitched at some point in my life.
Right. I mean, listen, like outside of literally just a couple of states, if you're in Mississippi or something like that, I mean, yeah, you can only bet in person, but they're outside of just a couple of states. There really isn't at this point. If legalized sports betting is available to you, there really isn't any sort of advantage to going offshore now, because the convenience factor of an app or being able to bet on your laptop and all is all there, right? I mean, we've really gotten to a point now to where, again, unless you have to get in your car and put on pants and go to a counter or something like that, like that's the only disadvantage really at this point.
2022 is not a time that I prefer to put on pants, guys. Like, I have learned for 2 years that there's a lot in this world I can do without having pants on, and I am not in a hurry to put on pants. Matt, the one thing that you didn't mention, we've talked about it before, we don't want to take this all the way down another road, but the one advantage that the offshore market, and this is going to be another example of volatility, can throw out there is cryptocurrency, right? And there's a reason. There's a reason, because they're not operating in a regulated environment. And so the risks of something like cryptocurrency don't mean the same thing that they do in the legal market, where it's hard enough to get sports betting legislation passed, let alone cryptocurrency regulation within sports betting.
The over-under on number of people on this podcast wearing pants is what is it, 1.5 or half?
Like full barrel pants, because
full barrel pants.
I have short barrel pants on right now. I don't have full barrel pants on.
Oh,
that's the beauty of the chest up shot here.
I think from now on, we're going to have to call most episodes of this short barrel or full barrel episodes based on the pants.
One day, listen, now that we're getting into now we're getting into real spring here in Vegas, I don't need to wear long pants in my home anymore. So yeah. Adam, take us home with the state roundup, my man.
Why not? State of Kentucky has more progress than we've been able to report in quite a while. And I'll be honest, I was one who kind of poo-pooed whether Kentucky could even move to this point. So good on Representative Adam Koenig in Kentucky, who has been the primary proponent for legalizing sports betting in the Bluegrass state. They have passed it through the House, and this is the first time in 4 tries that they've been able to get the bill at least through the House. Now, the opposition is in the Senate, and that's where the bill is awaiting its first committee hearing right now, but it's already farther along in Kentucky than we thought it would be at this point. Just starting the journey in Kansas, but Kansas had one of its first committee hearings this week on legal sports betting. They are really at the molding clay stage at this point. Didn't even take a vote in committee at this time, but they're still working on getting that legislation together. It would be legislation that would allow for online wagering. And what's interesting is that we're also in committee stage in Missouri. And if you know those 2 states, there is a little bit of rivalry there. And there could be some discussion as to whether one state moves, will the other state move? We're still tracking to see what goes on there. Let's check our legal obligation off here. As we mentioned, the state of New York and the fact that the most recent weekly update shows that in 10 weeks of wagering, 10 short weeks of wagering, more than $4 billion wagered.
That's a lot of money. So it's a lot of money. Good on those guys. As always, everything that we talk about here on this podcast, you can find over at legalsportsreport.com. So head over there, see Adam and the team. You got Matt and Pat and Brad and John and everybody putting out stories over there. So be sure and take in all of the words that they are doing. You can subscribe, rate, review, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, Google, all of that. We really do appreciate the support on the podcast as well. You should follow Dustin and Adam on the Twitter machine. It's absolutely free. Go smash the button at Dustin Galker, at Adam Candy, 2 E's, no Y. For Adam, for Dustin, I'm Matt. Talk to you guys next week.